for centuries the most influential philosophy in the Greco-Roman world, had a long history before Seneca. Founded by Zeno, born of Phoenician descent in Cyprus, circa 336–5 BC, who had taught or lectured in a well-known stoa, a colonnade or porch, hence the name, in Athens, it had been developed and modified by a succession of thinkers, whose opinions on various logical, ethical, or cosmological questions showed some fair divergences. As a moral creed, however, it was based throughout on the following framework of belief. The Stoics saw the world as a single great community in which all men are brothers, ruled by a supreme providence which could be spoken of almost according to choice or context under a variety of names or descriptions, including the divine reason, creative reason, nature, the spirit or purpose of the universe, destiny, a personal god, even by way of concession to traditional religion, the gods. It is man's duty to live in conformity with the divine will, and this means, firstly, bringing his life into line with nature's laws, and secondly, resigning himself completely and uncomplainingly to whatever fate may send him. Only by living thus, and not setting too high a value on things which can at any moment be taken away from him, can he discover that true, unshakable peace and contentment to which ambition, luxury, and above all avarice are among the greatest obstacles. Living in accordance with nature means not only questioning convention and training ourselves to do without all except the necessities, plain food, water, basic clothing, and shelter, but developing the inborn gift of reason, which marks us off as different from the animal world. We are meant to set free or perfect this rational element, this particle of the universal reason, the divine spark in our human makeup, so that it may campaign against and conquer pain, grief, superstition, and the fear of death. It will show us that there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Discipline the pleasures and the passions, and generally subordinate the body and emotions to the mind and soul. In this way, we shall arrive at the true end of man, happiness, through having attained the one and only good thing in life, the ideal or goal called arete in Greek, and in Latin virtus, for which the English word virtue is so unsatisfactory a translation. This, the summum bonum, or supreme ideal, is usually summarized in ancient philosophy as a combination of four qualities: wisdom, or moral insight, courage, self-control, and justice, or upright dealing. It enables a man to be self-sufficient, immune to suffering, superior to the wounds and upsets of life, often personalized as Fortuna, the goddess of fortune. Even a slave thus armed can be called free, or indeed titled a king, since even a king cannot touch him. Another example of these paradoxes for which the Stoics were celebrated is one directed at the vanity of worldly possessions. The shortest route to wealth is the contempt of wealth. This ethic, together with its backing in a system of physics and logic, had first been given shape in the minds of thinkers who, although Greek-speaking, were for the most part not of European descent, coming from places in Asia Minor or the Levant, like Tarsus, Cyprus, and Babylon. This does not seem to have reduced the appeal it made to educated Romans when, around the middle of the 2nd century BC, it first came to their notice. The duties it inculcated, courage and endurance, self-control and self-reliance, upright conduct and just dealing, simple and unluxurious habits, rationality, obedience to the state, were self-evident to many Romans, corresponding quite closely to the traditional idea of virtus. The development of the jus naturae by the Roman jurists and Posidonius' identification of the Stoic world community or cosmopolis with the Roman Empire made its acceptance even easier. At a later date, the Stoic view of the ruler, this term including governors, magistrates, and administrative officials, as a man whose actions could be criticized and even as a minister or servant, was to be disliked by emperors, some of whom replied by expelling the philosophers. But Stoics were usually far from hostile to monarchy as such. However openly they declared that rank counted for nothing against the duty of all men, whatever their station, to play their part in life well. Despite its wide acceptance in educated circles, early Stoicism had a forbidding aspect, which went far to explain its failure to influence the masses. There was something unreal or fictional about the sapiens, the wise man or philosopher. This ideal figure seemed, from the way the Stoic lecturers talked, to have somehow become perfect in some sudden transformation long ago. Gradual self-improvement was hardly discussed. The target it set seemed too high for ordinary men. It stifled and repressed ordinary human emotions, in striving after apatheia, immunity to feeling. Cato, the great Stoic saint, is reported to have expressed regret at having kissed his wife in a moment of danger. It held that, in certain circumstances, a man's self-respect might invite, as an act of supreme nobility, his suicide. In pursuing the ideal of autarkia, self-sufficiency, it seemed to make the perfect man a person detached and aloof from his fellows, superior to the world he lived in. Altogether, the impression it conveyed, for all its idealism and sincerity, could be cold, dogmatic, and unrealistic. Seneca's contribution to ancient philosophy lay in the humanization of this creed, continuing a process begun long before in Rhodes and Rome by Panetius and Posidonius. Although Seneca wrote for a relatively narrow circle of educated persons, usually addressing his compositions to a particular friend or relative, as if he were that person's special spiritual advisor, his letters and essays show a Stoicism more closely reconciled with the facts and frailty of human nature. The ideal of apatheia is much modified. Self-sufficient though he is, the sapiens can now have friends and can grieve, within limits, at the loss of one. It has become his duty to be kind and forgiving towards others, indeed, to live for the other person. In his way of living, he should avoid being ostentatiously different from those he tries to win from moral ignorance. He has to battle like the rest against his failings, in a long and painful progress towards perfection, in which all can do, with help from above or the inspiration of others' example. Seneca himself, we observe, occasionally makes immodest statements concerning his own progress, but is capable of humility, as in one description of himself as a long way from being a tolerable, let alone a perfect human being. In statements of man's kinship with a beneficent, even loving God, and of a belief in conscience as the divinely inspired inner light of the spirit, his attitudes are religious beyond anything in Roman state religion. In his day, little more than a withered survival of formal worship paid to a host of ancient gods and goddesses. Christian writers have not been slow to recognize the remarkably close parallels between isolated sentences in Seneca's writings and verses of the Bible. On the other hand, the word God, or the gods, was used by the philosophers more as a time-honored and convenient expression than as standing for any indispensable or even surely identifiable component of the Stoic system. And the tendency of Stoicism was always to exalt man's importance in the universe, rather than to abase him before a higher authority. The hope of immortality was occasionally held out, but Seneca does not play on it. To him, as to most Stoics, virtue was to be looked on as its own reward and vice as its own punishment. The religious hunger of the masses of his day was to be met not by philosophy, but by the cults of Isis and Mithras and Christianity. For the ancient world, then, apart from reviving philosophy in Latin literature, he spiritualized and humanized Stoicism. What of Seneca and modern philosophy? The latter, at least in the universities of the English-speaking world, has for some time been set on a course which he would certainly have condemned. He would not have understood the attention it pays to ordinary language. And some of his letters, for example, letter 48, make it clear that it would have come in for a share of his impatience with philosophers, not excluding Stoics, who in his eyes degraded philosophy by wasting their time on verbal puzzles or logical hair-splitting. But more than this, he would have denounced the opinion to which most philosophers, tacitly or otherwise, have come round in the last half-century, that it is no part of the business of philosophy to turn people into better persons, as tantamount to desertion or lèse-majesté. His tremendous faith in philosophy as a mistress was grounded on a belief that her end was the practical one of curing souls, of bringing peace and order to the feverish minds of men pursuing the wrong aims in life. What we say should be of use, not just entertaining. Even